Hello, welcome to the Cyberwar webinar. I am Natalie Rios from Conductor, and this webinar is to discuss why we need to care about cyberwar and how it affects us as civilians and society. So we have a great panel of security experts, researchers, and even a hacker, but I'll let the speakers to introduce themselves. So Parnian, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Hi, this is Parnia Najafi. I work as a researcher for FireEye, focusing on critical infrastructure and IoT. I'm also studying a PhD in IT in George Mason University.
Great, excellent. Thank you for being here. Andreas? Can you tell?
So hi, I'm Andreas Hagman. I'm currently a PhD student at Royal Holloway, University of London. I'm working on a thesis about wargaming cyber attacks.
Great, excellent. Thank you for being here. Ali?
Hi, I'm Ali Haider. I'm a security and forensics consultant. I work usually with governments in conflict zones. I set up offices, I set up security policies, and I do penetration testing for the systems to make sure they're safe.
Awesome. And finally, Robert?
Hi, I'm Robert Bratton. I'm a CEO at Conductor, and I kind of work in that space, which is the intersection of technology and storytelling. So we do a lot of scenario-based training for, well, for example, we work with Al Jazeera on their hacked experience, where you sort of role play a journalist investigating Syria's electronic army. We're working right now on a project with Angela Ruskin University on a crisis around a data center disaster. So that's the type of thing we get involved in.
Great, thank you. So to start the discussion, let's start with defining what is cyber war. What do we mean by that term? So Parnian, do you want to break the ice and take the first question?
Sure. Although we have better experts than me here for cyberwar, I believe Andres is a good fit for answering the first question. But I'll start. So cyber warfare, people define it as different things. For instance, it means different things for different people. It's basically the use of technology to cause disruption, propaganda, spread misinformation, or in some cases also destroying the enemy's infrastructure. In some cases, it is used in with other types of war. Let's say that's in airstrikes, for instance, they hack the radar so that it doesn't show the airplanes. Or sometimes it is used just on their own. So I think that's a brief introduction of the cyber war.
Great, thank you. Andreas, since Parnian mentioned you, do you want to give your definition of cyber war? How will you define it?
Yeah, dropped me in it there a little bit. So I think that's a very good definition. What I'd written down actually is just really briefly, I think cyber warfare just generally means using computer-enabled capabilities for offensive or defensive operations. But what I really wanted to say on this particular issue was that I think it's really important to make a distinction between cyber war and cyber warfare, because it's far too easy to use them interchangeably. So if you think of the term but with a different prefix like tank, tank war, for example, makes it sound like it's a whole war fought only with tanks, and that clearly doesn't happen. But tank warfare makes sense because that makes it seem like a tank is one tool out of many used in the war. So it's better to think of cyber like one of many tools used in warfare, not war. In a similar way, we speak of aerial warfare and naval warfare, but not aerial war or naval war. And cyber is recognized today as a warfighting domain, like the air and sea. But we shouldn't think. I don't think we should think of entire wars as fought in cyberspace. It's merely one of sort of the delivery mechanisms of a set of capabilities. And I absolutely agree that it means different things to different people. In Chinese, for example, the word for cyber is simply information. So the way they conceptualize cyber warfare is different to what we might do. And cyber encompasses a really broad spectrum from electronic warfare on one side to information warfare on the other. So depending on who's using the term, they might think of it as delivering like a hard kinetic effect, such as the example Pania gave about radar spoofing, or softer informational effects like IP theft or propaganda.
That's excellent. I think that thought is really good, of thinking of cyber warfare, and it's not about this war in cyberspace. It's actually a part of work. So we decided to do this webinar because we worked with Juliana Rufus from Al Jazeera in a web app about the Syrian cyber war. And I think using that as a current and specific example, it's a way of understanding what cyber war is and how it affects us and war. So let's start with, when did cyber war begin in Syria? Ali, can you
Hi.
start with this question?
Well, it's a difficult concept to pinpoint exactly the exact date. You can't say it started at 1-1 or 2-2 or something, but it did start at the beginning of the revolution, right? Because if you think of it, the way you can monitor people right now is through internet. It's one of the means, right? The Syrian regime quickly realized that the new way that they're communicating isn't like the old ways, using telephones or using handwritten messages or pigeons or anything anymore. It's the internet. And more people were getting moved by the internet. Facebook was a big motivator. They used to post Facebook movements, tell people to gather at a specific place on Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever application they were using. So the need to monitor and control this was more and more apparent to the regime. And then, so it started very early at the beginning. They started importing equipment to monitor the internet very early in the revolution. It was even before the unfortunate actual war started. It was even when it was started to be a peaceful revolution, the cyber war actually began.
Do you think that's always like that? Because for me it was interesting, because I never thought about cyber war when I thought of Syria, of the Syrian civil war. So do you think that's something that we should always keep in mind? Like, well, it's always there in a way.
Of course, people misunderstand. All governments monitor people, right? It's part of the intelligence apparatus, right? Even in the old days, they used to tap phones when there was no internet, right? So it's a job of the government to obtain as much information as they can about their citizens. It's the job of the Secret Service, right? So yes, it does affect everybody, because it is. If you think of it, even not the government, even companies now collect a lot of data about you. Think of Google. Google knows more about you than your own mother does, I'm pretty sure. if you think of it reasonably, it is true. So yes, it's a very important asset for people to be aware that, yes, they are being monitored. Whether or not it's a good or a bad thing, that's a moral debate. But I'm saying, are you being monitored? Yes, you are.
Yes.
Definitely.
I think what you're like sort of introducing there is this idea that we don't really, we might not necessarily know when we're at cyber war. Like, where is the boundary between an actual event that comes up? Because let's say adversaries could be gathering intelligence on us right now, and we might not be at any kind of known war, but they're obviously sort of laying the grounds for some future conflict.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what I mean by different people have different understanding of the cyber war. So we have different threshold for what we mean by cyber war. We've seen President Obama mentioning that if Russia attack our critical infrastructure, we're at cyber war with them. But if they get the information and they steal it or they leak the data, it's not considered cyber war yet, based on the international law that they follow. So in different countries, it means different things. The meaning of cyber war is not very clear.
Still a little bit in the space. I wanted to ask you, how has cyber war affected the Syrian conflict? Let's talk about the effect of it. Who wants to take this question? Maybe Parnian or?
Okay, so what I can say is that uh, both of the both sides of the conflict is using their methods. Their cyber method is not necessarily cyber war, but they're using the surveillance to find out where are the dissidents, or they're trying to find out the monitor. They're trying to monitor, let's say, their Facebook account, their social media accounts, and all that, and trying to figure out what are their plans, their future plans. Or they censor the information, they have propaganda and misinformation campaigns, so that they say the government is good, or the reverse way is right. So there are different means that people use, using cyber techniques to basically propagate the information through the space and try to find out what exactly the next step of the government or the next step of the dissidents is.
One of the things I found striking in the FireEye report was that there was somebody on the front line using Skype, and they managed to lift the battle plans from like a Skype malware. I was like, why is someone talking like it's basically being catfished by an attractive woman? Like, shouldn't his mind be focused on the job at hand rather than?
Well, the FireEye report, what people don't understand about the FireEye report is that most military operations and most of the war in Syria, they're using shared laptops. It's not a single laptop, right? They don't have internet access all the time. They have specific spots where they have satellite receivers that give them internet, not phones. So they're mostly 4, 5, 6 commanders, or 4, 5, 6 people use the same laptop. So that laptop, if it gets compromised, it's the compromise isn't just for one; it's compromised for all. And obviously, what you're misunderstanding is the attack was very smartly done, because people at war are still people. They have basic needs. In fact, their needs are more than the basic guy, because he is cut off from everything. He might die the next day. He wants the idea of he might find someone, love, romance, sex. Sorry for the saying. That are all very smart social engineering questions and social engineering tricks that they use to extract information, because they tagged them from Skype, and the people were in Beirut, and obviously they're not women, and they sent them supposedly naked pictures, and the guys clicked on it. It wasn't a naked picture, it was a Trojan. He was hacked, and if one computer gets hacked, it's not just one account, it's multiple accounts. It's quite fascinating, actually, if you read the study carefully.
I mean, are these sort of social engineering techniques, put people more at risk than the actual technology kind of side of hacking?
Of course, con artists are one of the most successful thieves in the world, right? And they don't use elaborate methods. They don't hack. They use social weaknesses, right? It's most of the attacks are socially engineered, right? It's what they teach you in any security course. What is the weakest link in the company? It's your employees. It's always your employees, because your employees are the ones that click on a bait or do something outside the security policy. So yes, social engineering usually is one of the main. It's not the only way, obviously, but it's one of the main ways that people get tricked into it. Even ransomware or current ransomware are being propagated. So social engineering, they send you a PDF or a Word document with a macro, and then you click on it, and then you get infected.
Yeah, basically the activities that we see are mostly are not very complicated activities. We usually see defacement, social account compromise, or we see DNS hijacking, data leaks, and these kind of things that are really simple to do. And social engineering is a big part of that, in order to basically lure those people to gave the information away, gave their password away, or this kind of information. That really helps, instead of having a complex malware in place that they can use for cyber warfare. As a cyber warfare, they use social engineering because it doesn't cost that much.
Yeah. Could we say that the social engineering tactics are used more, in Syria, were they used to attack the opposition in a way? Because one of the questions that I had was how cyber war has been used to attack both the government and the opposition. So maybe, I don't know, we can elaborate a little bit on that?
So the government has the upper hand in Syria because they're controlling the internet. They're basically, they can man in the middle of the connections, all the connections, because they make people install the certificates with all the basically fake applications that we have in place that because they're under sanctions, so they don't have access to Apple Store or Google stores. What they have to do is that they have to basically go to third-party marketplaces and install those applications, which are in some cases Trojanized. And in this way, they can get the data of those, people, those dissidents. So what they're trying to do is that they're trying to, let's say, man in the middle and get the, let's say, the Telegram information from them. So if you have to verify your Telegram account, you have to use SMS. In some cases, what they do is that they get that SMS and they register your account, and they can get access to your account in that way.
You know what that brings to mind actually is Andreas's game, because what alarmed me with that is we spent a lot of our time buying stuff from the darknet in order to avoid it falling into someone else's hands, and it just, this idea of like hacking as a service and such. Like, maybe what do you think about that, Andreas? Maybe you could talk to the wide availability of these tools now to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of the attacks, not just in Syria, but I'm thinking specifically in the UK, something like the TalkTalk hack, where it was perpetrated by a teenager sitting in his mother's basement, effectively, and anyone can have access to some really, you could say, powerful but simple tools that can cause some real mayhem, if you will. But you don't need any skill to use it, and you don't necessarily even need to pay any money to acquire them. So I think the idea of the sort of black market or the dark market as leveling the playing field somewhat is an interesting one.
It's a pretty scary one, if you ask me, because I mean, it used to be the idea that you need to be pretty clever in order to be able to mount these attacks, but as the barrier sort of goes down and you realise, well, actually anybody could potentially anybody could take up, anybody with a grievance against you could go and find something and start attacking. It makes it even worse.
Sure.
One thing that I wanted to discuss is what is hacktivism? That is something that I learned very recently. So what is hacktivism, and what is the role of hacktivism in Syria and civil war? Who wants to take this question?
I can do it if you'd like.
Yes, of course.
So hacktivism, it's a form of a movement, right? It's a form of a statement, right? It's the same like anything else in the world. You have people who have the statements against killing animals, right? That's a political statement. Hacktivism by itself is a political statement, meaning you're objecting to something, but using technology instead of throwing eggs, right? It's not that difficult.
Virtual eggs.
Yeah. When I was younger, I used to throw eggs. Now I
defaced people's websites.
But the role in Syria is much darker, because it's the stakes, right? If I'm hacking a fashion website because they're selling fur and I deface them and I put, please don't buy from them, they're selling fur, they're killing animals, there is a political statement, but the impact is relatively low. In Syria, the impact is very high because you have people's lives at stake, right? In both directions. I'm not saying any political statement. In both directions, both parties would like to get at each other, right? So the stakes in Syria are quite high. So when you uncover or hack or deface or do anything that gives you information, you know who your enemy is. and a lot of people actually unfortunately lost their lives because of it. We've had a lot of people from both sides die because of hacks.
Hmm.
I can't talk about, obviously, but it has happened.
That is shocking because hacking can lead to that, even to
It depends on the stakes.
But how did it lead to death, so Ali? Like what?
Well, since I'm under contract, I can't really say names or stuff. So I have to respect the security of the project. But I'll tell you the general consensus. We had journalists that were working inside Syria were reporting. I can give an example later. That actually got caught by the regime that they were leaking, and they were executed. There was a checkpoint waiting for them. When they got to the checkpoint, they were dismantled from the car, shot, and then that was it. And the same happened the other way. So that I don't want to look like I'm putting a political statement. I'm not. I'm non-political. I'm a researcher at the end of the day. But it is what it is. It is people are losing their lives because of the hacks and of the war. It's a stake at place.
No, I thought one of the things I found shocking in Juliana's documentary was the guy that says basically he gets brought in for interrogation and then tortured to give up his Facebook password so that then they can go through all his friends and sort of like basically round them all up as well. It's pretty. I mean, I don't know if that counts as cyber warfare because that sounds like pretty kinetic to me. But
if you think of the ISIS, the Raqqa, Free Raqqa, they had a website and it's a movement called Free Raqqa, which they're broadcasting against ISIS. It's not even against the regime. It's against ISIS. It's a completely different person. And ISIS people were analyzing their videos, checking the height of the guy, the shade, so that they can whatever they could analyze from video footage. They were trying to so that they know the identity of the person's shooting. They actually killed 2 activists in Turkey that were from Raqqa. They died. If you check the news, you can find it. So it's what I'm saying. It's not just the regime against the Free Syrian Army. It's everybody against everybody. It's a big, wide war that's going there.
On that point, can I ask a question? Have we seen much like intervention by, say, non-Syrian aligned hacktivist groups like Anonymous and people like that? Have they got involved at all with the conflict?
Well, to my knowledge, yes, but very little. Right? Anonymous, they did a couple of hacks on the Syrian website. They defaced it, but it's nothing that would really. It was nothing significant. It was more symbolic than anything significant.
Right.
There are reports that some hacks are done by other agencies, which I don't know if it's right or wrong. The FireEye report suggests that one of the hacks was done by an outside group from Syria of a certain nationality. Is it true or not? I don't know. I'm not an expert. I can't say if it's 100% correct or not. I can only vouch for what I know as information, but it makes sense, right? This is a global war. The Syrian regime and the others, they both have affiliations. I'm sure other secret services are helping in certain ways, most probably.
I think this is one of the things about cyber war. It's kind of a low barrier to entry with a potentially high sort of reward. And it means that people, it used to be that you could only have sort of, I don't know, states versus states, but now you can have these non-state actors. Anybody that wants to start like their own hacktivist group could actually become a political force, and it might not be, like damaging equipment. It could just be propaganda and causing humiliation and these types of things, which could be just as effective at the right time and targeted at the right populations.
That is correct. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. If any of the other panelists would like to say anything, but if you look at the Ukraine incident, right, the hacking of the power plant, right, dark energy or black energy, I forgot what the official name which was. It was obviously done by a government. It wasn't done by a simple group, right? The hack was advanced. The malware was advanced. So yes, you do have levels of hacking, right? You have government levels. Stuxnet virus was definitely not a single entity. It was a government, right? You have different levels of hacking. You have hacking that's quite high, and you can see it from the sophistication of the malware. And you have low hacking, right? Which is cyber war in Syria is considered low hacking. The Trojans used for the Skype incident are very old Trojans. The code was a bit modified. It wasn't something wow, brain shattering, right? It was stuff we've all seen. All of us we've seen in forensic analysis. They were very basic malware. Well, if you look at the dark energy malware, it was a really nice, juicy piece to analyze, right? It had multiple layers, it had encoding, it had the parts where it knew if it was running on a VM or not, so it stopped operating like a virus if it caught the VM. It was quite an interesting piece of malware to
Yeah,
study.
and in Ukraine case, it was not just malware, but all the things that happen in place. The malware was not the part that's put the power grid down, but the hackers got into the system. They disabled, they turned the power grid off, and then they used the malware to just make it harder for them to get back onto the system. They also use TDOS to basically cause the telephones to go down, and so that it makes it hard for the engineers to call each other and get the system back up, or they erase the SCADA system so that they had to manually go to the place and turn it back on. So it was collaboration between different teams that basically pulled that trick off. It was not just the malware, so it was the level of sophistication was based on different teams that work together to pull the hack off.
Wow. I guess the problem with doing these more sophisticated hacks is that you kind of lose some deniability there. You can't turn around and say, it wasn't us. They go, well, I don't know anyone else who could have pulled this off.
So attribution is a hard thing to do. You cannot say that since we see this small, kind of showing that, for instance, if we see something Russian written in a malware, we cannot say that, oh, it's a Russian government or it's a Russian actor. So we have to study those themes for a long time to be able to attribute it well. And it's hard to attribute that piece of, let's say, malware or that piece of hack to a certain person. So we can say that this group does that, but it's hard to find and put a real name to those people.
What is the role of deniability in cyber war, and can we ever be sure of who the attackers are? I mean, what role does it play?
Well, I'm sure the FireEye team can collaborate that much better since they're much more experts on the topic than I am. But in my humble opinion, and it is a humble opinion, they have much more experience than I do in forensics. Deniability is just it's the same thing as anything, right? It's if you're talking big hacks, right? We didn't do it. Even if we did do it, it's having suspicion and knowing for a fact somebody did something are very different. I can tell you that I know for a fact, or I suspect 20% that my little sister ate my chocolate cheesecake today because there's nobody else at the home. But can I prove it? I can't. No, really, I can't. But if I have it on tape, it's different. And it's the same thing. Like, we can have strong suspicions that the code is, let's say the time zone is Russia. The way it's coded looks Russian. It might have Russian bits codes, but does that mean it's a Russian government? No, I have no proof. Does that mean it's a Russian actor? No, it could have been taken from a Russian and then used in other parts. So it's not as that simple to prove it. To have suspicion is easy. The way I'm doing that, we think it is definitely not that or this, right? Because these are general allegations. I know that a single person can't do this. A big group needs to do it. Does that mean it's the Russian government? No, I can't prove it. Does that mean it's the American government? I can't prove it. Does it mean it's any government? You can't prove it. That's the main difference. And the difference between forensics and hearsay is evidence, right? If it has to hold in the court of law, does it hold in the court of law? That's the question.
Presumably, it's a bit easier if people are stealing money because the money shows up in their bank account.
although they usually use money mules for that, or they try to trick other people to move the money for them. So that's also hard to basically attribute to them if they are smart. So if they just steal some money and put it in their bank account, yes, it's easy to attribute it. But if we're dealing with financial gain criminals that have a big team working together to from the malware authors or malware users to money mules that can be basically as simple as foreign students moving from one country to another country, that they're trying to make a little bit of money and they're happy to move the money for them. So it's really hard to attribute who the actual hackers or who the actual criminals are in that case.
Well, that's really interesting. Taking that, how could we say that cyber war has changed modern politics and modern warfare?
I can weigh in on that a little bit, I suppose. So
yes.
I think cyber capabilities in general are very attractive to military and policymakers to use because they're cheaper to use. And I don't mean cheaper as in they cost less, because they can cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop, i.e. Stuxnet, and take a long time. But what I mean is the political capital you need to expend to use them. With cyber capabilities, you don't need to put boots on the ground and commit forces and potentially put lives at risk, or in the literal line of fire, as you would with traditional capabilities. So a good example of this might be a couple of weeks ago, the Secretary of State for Defence in the UK, Michael Fallon, announced that the UK are conducting offensive cyber operations against ISIS, and there was no public debate about that beforehand. They just went and did it. And you compare that to something like the debate about conducting airstrikes against the Assad regime in Syria in 2014, which went to a House of Commons vote and got voted down after an extensive debate. And that's, I think, a really good example of where you see the difference between how cyber has sort of changed some of the politics around warfare compared to traditional capabilities.
I would say as well, just thinking about that a lot of a lot of these battles are fought in the public arena with public opinion and public sentiment, and so this is why using sort of cyber stuff to influence opinion, either in your own country or in the adversary's country, can help you achieve your goals, whatever they might be, with non-military means. So you could, basically propaganda, for example, is a weapon in the arsenal now. Whereas it used to be that it might be difficult to get that, to get that out to the population with social media, for example. It must be much easier now to deliver that message.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we're seeing some really clever uses of social media by all sorts of different people. And like, just to pick a topical one, someone like Trump. I mean, well, whatever you think of him, his use of Twitter is pretty damn good for what he wants to achieve. And likewise, the Russians are really good at the sort of information warfare type stuff, and they've been good at that for a long, long time. The fact that they're now doing it with cyber is just a different delivery mechanism for something they've been doing for decades.
I think this is one of the things that we do in our work. It's about telling stories. It's about a battle of narratives, and it's also about perception. So it doesn't always matter what is the real reality, like the ground truth. It's what people believe to be the reality, which is what you were saying, Pania, as well.
Yeah, so there was a funny story in the news recently that some Macedonian teens were using this misinformation campaign. They were making some sensational headlines, and they're trying to make it the headlines in a way that are clickbaits, so that it shows as a real news article, but they are not real news. So they posted on Facebook, and they were making money out of it. And they trying to test it to figure out how well it works. So they're trying to put some sensational headlines for Clinton. It didn't work very well, and they tried it with Trump. It worked better. So they said that for now we're sticking with Trump, and after the election we'll find another way. Maybe healthcare is a good example that people really try to click on the information that is about their health or about the new way to lose weight without doing anything.
Exactly. I heard the Macedonians were selling like mugs and T-shirts and all sorts of stuff. It's a big export now, like Trump merch to supporters.
Now that you mentioned Trump, since today are the elections, the U.S. elections, would you like to comment on what has been the role of hacking, and how has hacking and cyberwar affected or impacted the elections?
Well, you see, we like Hillary's email leaks, and again, it comes back to this idea of like one perception. Like, is there anything of any substance in these emails at all anyway? But it gives an adversary an opportunity to sort of spin a story around this. And then the other idea is like, well, who is actually doing this? It was on WikiLeaks. Are they independent? Is somebody that did it? And I'm thinking also about the Panama revelations about investments and such like that. Often these hacks are about causing embarrassment or conflict in the same team. Any kind of disharmony is sort of used to people's advantage.
Yeah. Let's move to how cyber threats impact society. I think this is important. I'd like to ask, where is the line between criminal activity and state-sponsored attack?
Well,
how can we draw the line?
There's a difference. State-sponsored attacks are usually for political or government gain, right? So if you think of all of them impact society, obviously, but if you think of let's say criminal elements, well, ransomware is a very good example of criminal elements. They hack your computer, they encrypt your files, and then they demand money. And that money is usually Bitcoin, so it's difficult to trace. Not impossible, but difficult to trace. And they make money out of it. It impacts you, it disrupts your work, it causes you financial loss sometimes, and it's a multi-million-dollar industry. It's people think ransomware is not a lucrative business. It's an extremely lucrative business. Illegal business, obviously, but it is very lucrative. That's why they're doing it. They make a lot of money out of it. But I think also the scary thing is now is the scale of the internet attacks that are coming are scary, because if you think of, there was recently a hospital that got hacked and was completely out of service because of the hack. The Ukraine incident, the energy is really, really scary if you think of it, because electricity provides everything for everyone. It's a huge impact. Think of your medical services, your tube services, anything. All of these services are like crucial. If they get hacked, what's the damage that could happen? It's a catastrophic damage. And these, if they're state-sponsored, it means one government can cripple another completely for a couple of hours if they hack their tube system and electrical system and health system. So it's no longer a case of, oh yeah, I can or deface a website. It's the case of your core infrastructure. There was a study that said the 911 system in the States is vulnerable to denial of service attack. If enough calls come in, it could stop. And the same as in the UK, obviously. We're not in the UK, the same as in the UK. So our core infrastructure service is at risk. And this is, I think, the most important issue to be addressed by the government right now is how do you protect your core infrastructure? For me, at least, because this is has a big impact on people's lives.
I was thinking if the tube went down to 30 minutes, there'd be like civil war.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be any sympathy in London. They were like, what? If you have to wait 5 minutes for a tube, that's like a disaster. So 30 minutes. But I mean, this again shows like the blurring of the line between like what would have been military targets in the past. Okay, you might have taken out a substation with a bomb or something, but now you can actually like intimidate the population by taking out the transport system, for example, and slowly sort of grind them down and make life a misery for them without ever really sort of killing anybody potentially. So,
Yeah, exactly. So one is just causing disruption and destruction at the same time. For instance, as Ali mentioned, if we don't have electricity, what's going to happen? So the traffic system, the traffic control system is affected, the transportation system is affected. You don't have gas, you cannot take gas from gas pumps. You cannot operate in hospitals. You can let's say the 911 cannot operate well. So it escalates to different levels, and basically they can easily cripple a nation's in that way. For instance, in 2003, I think it was in 2003 that we had some blackouts in the east of the US, and it affected several states, and it lasted for several days, and that really showed how important the critical infrastructure is. It wasn't a cyber attack, it was just a software bug, but that also showed that really if we have a cyber attack on the critical infrastructure, it can really cripple a country.
Yeah. So could we say that all the companies are equal targets, and how should they prepare and how they are responding to cyber attacks?
I think that everyone are not equal targets. So if there are some ways that cyber criminals can make money out of that company, they are bigger targets. If they are following some specific policies, they're target of hacktivists. If they have relation with certain entities, they may be a target from another group. So it depends what you're working on and what is important. So let's say that if you're a chip manufacturer and certain, let's say, nation states want to get your proprietary information, how you're making chip, because they're interested in that chip specifically, you'll be targeted. These are the examples that we've seen previously.
Interesting. And how should we respond as civilians? And why should we be prepared? Anyone?
Well,
Maybe Andres, yeah.
Yeah, no, of course, I guess I can offer a simple list of do's and don'ts that will echo with everyone on this panel. But it's just like basic cyber hygiene stuff, like do's, like use long and strong passwords, preferably use a password manager. Don't reuse your passwords, and don't have like password 123 and crap like that. And also, if you can, use two-factor authentication. Like most email providers will offer two-factor authentication, which means they send you a code to your mobile whenever you want to log in. It just means that even if your password is stolen, they shouldn't be able to log into your email, because they also need to have your phone, as it were. So you'd have a serious personal breach if that were to happen. And then simple don'ts, like don't click on links in emails, don't open attachments unless you trust the sender, don't plug in foreign USB sticks into your machine, don't use open Wi-Fi networks unless you know how to use a VPN, and don't enable macros in like Word documents. It's really like simple things like that. I mean, it's easy to laugh at them, but those are like the main routes in, and that's where sort of most of the where the low-level cyber attacks come from. It's the low-hanging fruit like that. And if people started sort of adhering to some similar list of do's and don'ts to that, we could cut out so many of the simpler attacks that actually end up doing quite a lot of damage.
The thing is though, Andreas, a lot of normal business is about accepting attachments, clicking links. So it's not that straightforward, is it?
No, and that's absolutely a problem. I mean, I guess you can open attachments and click links if you trust the sender. And there are programs that will like scan this stuff for you and make sure you open stuff in a sandbox environment and things like that, and implement technical solutions to the problem. But I mean, for your average user, it's just really simple things.
I mean, one of the things I think about when we get involved in these types of projects is really right from an early age, like sort of kids at school and sort of teenagers and that, all really to be taught about critical thinking and looking for evidence, about be much more questioning about where information's coming from, about the validity of the person actually giving that information out. And these things like passwords, I mean, that should be taught now from about 7 years old, how to come up with an uncrackable password, because from that young age they've already got mobiles and social media accounts, even though they're not supposed to be on social media. So it's never too early. This is like just looking both ways when you cross the street now. I think if people I think among my friends that don't work in sort of like IT or anything of this nature, they don't realise how important it is to start educating yourself and others about these potential threats. And I know maybe there's people watching in the UK, but the government has launched this sort of Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus scheme to encourage people to basically get a bit more savvy and put in place basic sort of antivirus measures and such like to protect themselves, because they recognise, and maybe this is a swing back to Pania, that you could get like a whole basic zombie army of people's computers or coffee machines out there ready to, like, primed for a denial of service attack. So you've got somebody like my mother or something thinks, well, why is anybody going to hack me? I've got no money or nothing to offer anybody. But that sort of programmable coffee machine could become like some kind of bot in a war at some point.
What you're actually talking about already happened.
Yeah, there you go, then.
The biggest service attack that we witnessed, the 1 terabyte attack, denial of service, was for the Internet of Things. I'm sure my colleague from FireEye knows much more about it since it's her field, but it happened last month, I think, or was it?
Yeah, the Dyn DNS provider was hacked, basically DOSed. So yeah, that's what we see, and the training of people is the most important thing that we should do. For instance, as Andre said, these simple things really helps. For instance, they have, they send some email to a certain person that doesn't even working with that specific service that they receive email from, and they're saying that, should I click on the email, I like the link, and figure out what it is? And I said, do you use the service? You don't even use the service, so there's no need to receive an email from that specific service. So these are the things that we see. For instance, they say that, oh, this is a new app with these features for free. I saw some relatives wanted to activate this features, and I said that, don't click on the link. And they said, why? There's nothing wrong with it. So you don't know what is in it. It can be Trojanized. So these are the simple things that people need more education to figure out. This can happen to all of them. They should not be just targeted to be attacked, because their computer are, important for this zombie army. It may not be valuable. They may not have valuable information on it, although they think that they don't have valuable information. If they have bank accounts, if they have social security number on their computer, that's valuable enough for the cyber criminals.
We have someone in the internet saying insistently that port management is the key. I'm not quite sure what that means, but
Well,
maybe Ali has an opinion on that
I
because I
mean,
thought it was
in my
interesting.
area,
The king of port management.
security consultant. Well, port management alone is not enough, because I'll give him an example. Let's say I'm very good at port management. I put a firewall, I filter everything. I have only my port, which is open 443. I have an HTTPS website, and my website has an SQL injection flaw. What does my port management do? Nothing, because the attack goes through the port, because it's an application layer attack. And then the hacker has access to my database. If he's smart enough, he might be able to call a stored procedure. He might have access to my SQL server. Lots of horrible things could happen. So just port management is not enough, or all banks would just do port management and it would all be correct. Then you would need to put IPSs, you would need to put WAF filters. You have a lot of security technology that is catered to just not port management, to scanning actually the application layer and the code. So no offense to whoever said that port management is important, it's not the end solution. Unfortunately, in security, there isn't a one bullet that solves everything.
Following on from that as well, in Ali's nice description there, he used a lot of words which will mean nothing to the general person on the street. So port management might be great for someone who knows what a port is, but for 99% of the population, that won't mean anything. It's completely useless.
So is this part of the training? I mean, do you think that everyone should be trained in this area?
No, I don't think there's. People get turned off by technology. So technology, most people want technology to just work. You don't want to have to go in and fiddle with the settings. So it's a sort of difficult balance of trying to make security really accessible, but also making it well secure. Because as soon as you start dumbing it down, it might become less secure than it actually is meant to be. So for security practitioners, with like technical security practitioners, I think that's probably a difficult balance to find.
Yeah, but we should expect the users to do minimal things. For instance, if they're using some IoT and they're not changing the default password, it can be attacked easily. I mean, that there are some things that we can expect the companies and manufacturers to do, but certain things we should teach the user to do that in order to be secure. And just this kind of things, not clicking, as you mentioned, not clicking on all the links is important. Or let's say choosing strong password. Don't use your cat's name as something. So I don't know if you've seen the segments that I think it was Jimmy Kimmel that went to the streets in LA and asked for people's password, and they would just give it to him. So that was quite interesting.
So it's quite a lot of education needed in a lot of areas.
No, I believe it's a valid point, right? You go to university or to school and you learn about physics and chemistry and biology, and I learned about molecules and physics, gravity and the basic stuff. But I never used it in my life. I'm a 36-year-old guy now. I've never used physics to solve anything. But I have the basics, right? It's the basics. If I want to go into something else, I understand the basics, right? And I believe IT security should become a basic to the people too, because even though I know people don't like technologies, I don't like chemistry. It's a great science, but I don't like it. But it doesn't mean I don't know anything about it, right? IT security should be like that. I believe it. There should be some form of school or university program that is mandatory for people to take to learn a little bit of IT security, the do's and don'ts. It's really important. And it's going to become more and more important as we advance, because technology is going to become more and more important. And it might soon, I don't know, in 200 years, you might have machines that feed you, right? We might not do anything, and we might use machines completely, but you need security for all that. It's really important. So no, I'm a very strong advocate of a educational program for at least one course that's IT security related.
Or at least what I've seen that different companies do is that when they ask for you to change your password, is that you have to pass a training before you change your password. It's annoying, but it works. You know, you can brute force it, but it's better to just learn and, basically learn the training and go through and answer the questions instead of brute forcing it.
The trouble is, though, if you're some big shot at a bank, you get your personal assistant to do it. I don't have time with all these fancy passwords. Just make something up. Just sit there, click through it, and then. So
actually, in banks, the upper management have more security constraints than the lower management.
And all the more incentive to give it over to their personal assistant.
They can't.
Write it down on their.
Assistants can't do it. If you have a bank that does that, please tell me.
I mean, the thing I was trying to allude to there is, it's basically the conduct risk. It's basically getting people into the right mindset. So if you have to force someone to do something, that's one approach. But if you can get them to properly understand that, this is a real big risk and it's something you need to pay attention to, like, putting your seatbelt on in the car or whatever it might be. The sound goes off, but you can still drive the car without it plugged in if you're happy to listen to it beeping. But, it should come as second nature. And this is the sort of behaviours we want to develop in people going forward, I imagine.
So it's getting to the time to wrap up the webinar. It's been a great discussion, I think, and really good insights and thoughts. And yeah, we need to create awareness and to be trained and to understand that cyber war is, cyber is everywhere and it's a weapon as well. I mean, it's like a weapon in war. So I'd like to thank you to the panel and the audience. And right now, I'm just gonna ask you to share with the audience any links, any websites, or any Twitter handle that you would like. I'll start with Parnian, and any closing thoughts if you want to share anything.
Okay, thank you for having me. It was great pleasure to talk with you all the panelists. My Twitter handle is Parnian_7. If you're interested, you can also find me on LinkedIn. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ali, do you want to share?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure meeting all of you again. Oh, I've met you before, but the rest of the panel it was a pleasure to meet you. I just want people to be a bit more paranoid, a bit more aware of the risks when they're surfing the internet. A bit more awareness is always needed. And that's it.
Great, thank you very much. Andreas?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me as well. I hope everyone listening in have found it as stimulating as I have. Maybe my closing words would be to just point out that a lot of the stuff we see in cyber warfare and cybersecurity isn't actually unique or new. It just happens to be old stuff as applied to computers. But if anyone wants to reach me, I can be found on Twitter, Andreas_Hagman. I don't know, does that show up? Yeah, kind of. Trying to wear it back. And I'm on LinkedIn, and there's a university profile page. So if you Google me, you'll find me.
Great, thank you. And Robert?
As a closing thought, I was thinking if there are any sort of budding hackers out there, there is actually like hacking competitions, so that you turn to the sort of white side rather than the dark side. And you can, I think, if you just search around, you actually find, because there is a massive shortage of trained security experts, and so anybody going to university or in university right now, it's a good area to start getting interested in, and maybe think of it as a future career, because not only will you earn a lot of money, but also the country's defence needs more people with the sort of skills that the guys on the panel have. And so that's me, and you can find me on Twitter as Rob Bratton, and if you check me out on LinkedIn, you see I've got some blog posts about all sorts of stuff related to cyber and scenario-based learning. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, all. See you next time in the next webinar. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.